Hi, my name's Danielle. I'm one of the owners of Zen Space and Cupping Studio. I consider myself to be a body positive practitioner. I'm an acupuncturist by trade, and I see patients at Zen Space about 5 days a week at the moment. This is my friend Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily, and I'm a registered dietitian. I practice within health at every size principles, so body positive, nutrition, counseling, and yeah.
So needed right now. All
Yeah.
right, Emily. So today we wanted to talk a little bit about what some of these terms mean: diet culture, eating disorder, disordered eating patterns, food rules, and those types of things. So, all the things that you hear thrown around quite a bit on social media, but maybe some people don't actually know what it really means, or they know what it means to them, but they're not really sure what it means on a more of a clinical kind of formal basis. So let's just jump right in. So my first question is, what does diet culture mean to you, and what does that look like? And I can just say how that looks for me is diet culture. I feel like is something that I've grown up with in this culture in America. Something that is kind of ever present. It seems a little bit like hidden at times, like maybe you don't really understand that some of the messaging you're getting is what we would call diet culture, but it's always based on how you look, what you weigh, how clothes are fitting you, if you're fitting into that more stereotypical model of beauty, that sort of thing. That's kind of how I've always felt about it. But what does it mean to you, being the expert?
Yeah. So when I think about diet culture, immediately I kind of think about the industry behind all of it, right? Because there's a lot of different things at play that are kind of influencing beauty standards or, the pressure to be thin. And there's a lot of products that we can sell based off of that. So I think that what really fuels it is money and industry, beauty and social media, like influencers and all that kind of stuff, can really have a big influence on it. Anything that's comparison rooted, for sure. I think diet culture, that's really strong. And anything restrictive and super hyper focused on weight loss, like, a lot of products that are for your health, the big thing is centered around weight loss. So when we center everything around that, it kind of starts to become about diets and fitting a certain way rather than health, because we know for some people it might not be healthy for them to lose weight at that moment, but diet culture kind of assumes that it is for everybody and places that pressure kind of unreasonably on people.
And do you feel like that can go both ways? I mean, I feel like there's people who always want to talk about weight loss, but then there's also that other crowd that kind of talks about fitness more from like a fitness perspective, with the undertone of either getting super ripped and being super fit and looking like that CrossFit model, or or losing weight and being, kind of more of a stereotypical size. But it does seem like if you're thin, they want to talk about gaining weight in certain ways. And if you're, someone who might be in a heavier body, then they want to talk about losing weight. It does seem like it kind of, there's never really like a happy medium with it, though. It's always some sort of like, you should be working on your body as a project and a goal, and we should be constantly trying to get you to a certain level. Like, how do you feel about that?
Right. And it's kind of like what you had mentioned in the beginning, where it can be kind of sneaky and a little bit insidious. Like when we talk about the pressure to like exercise a ton and get super ripped, like you're saying, that might be good for some people. And some people take that and feel really motivated. And then for some people, it's like that starts the downward spiral of them kind of obsessing a little bit and feeling less than. And when people are stating that's inherently better, how can you feel anything other than less than for not having that specific kind of model or standard that they're kind of talking about, whether it's super thin or super muscular and like in shape.
Right. Yeah.
Hmm.
And it kind of, feels like the in shape kind of also being in shape means maybe you have abs or a certain kind of look. It kind of bypasses like, yeah, I work out 5 days a week and my body looks the way that it looks and it's fine that way. It always seems like it's goal oriented or something like that, like, okay, work out 5 days a week, but you also need to look this way if you're working out 5 days a week. You can't work out 5 days a week and look that way. You have to change something. Like I've heard a lot of messaging around like, you can't out train a bad diet. So,
Oh God, yeah.
so it seems like working out isn't enough, dieting isn't enough. There's constantly something that we should be working on with our bodies. And it's not just geared towards, to females. I think it's geared towards every type of person, every type of body, is just this obsession with like, I don't know, obsession with like being goal oriented. And I do think that, there is something to be said about being goal oriented, and that can be really positive in some ways. But I think making our goals like to be, I work out because I feel like working out, it makes me feel good. And this is what I enjoy doing. And this is a treat that I get to do because I have this healthy body that allows me to move, in these ways. And it feels really good and like good to me, as opposed to like, no, you got to do like 10 burpees and in under a minute, and then you've got to like, I don't know, I mean, just all these crazy ideas. I mean, I personally kind of made the decision that like, I am no longer interested in doing things that feel like torture to me. Now, does that mean that, so for example, I really like to spin. Does that mean that I'm always like loving being on the spin bike? No, sometimes it feels really hard and I'm breathless, but it always feels good to my body, as opposed to like, I just decided with quarantine, I'm not interested in doing burpees anymore. Like, I don't want to do one more burpee. It feels like torture. It doesn't feel good on my body. It hurts my joints. And that's okay. And that's like a place that I've had to get to where I'm like, no, burpees just aren't for me. And some people may feel really empowered by them, but it's just, my goal is to feel good in my body, as opposed to like wanting it to look a certain way or be a certain way.
Right. And it all kind of comes down to like your tendency, for you, it's like, no matter how much you like try to like someone's like your trainer, whoever's like, you can do it, you can do it. You're like, I hate these. And it's just not really shifting for me. And this is better. So it's like when their diet culture is kind of like people giving out this blanket statement advice for everyone. And it just doesn't work, like if you could see that and you're like, oh, I feel like I have to do burpees because everybody's saying like that's the exercise to do, and it feels like everybody likes this and it's great for this person, why not for me? So that it kind of steals all that individualism out of it, because they can't possibly be giving advice to all the people that they have a platform with.
Yeah, exactly. Because everyone is different and unique, and different exercise work differently for different people. And that's one thing that I love about Chinese medicine, is that within Chinese medicine, we talk a lot about people's patterns or people's, constitutions, and they're not all the same. So, while one person might really thrive on, cutting out dairy or something that's really damp producing, like they cut that out and they feel better than ever, other people may have a constitution where dairy is really healthy for them. And so when you are reading these blanket statement kind of like guidelines for diets, like everyone should be phobic of bread, or everyone should be phobic of, I don't know, whatever, like gluten or whatever the newest ingredient that we're not supposed to like is, it doesn't always work for everyone. And I think that's where a lot of people get really kind of in the cycle of being frustrated, because they're like, I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing. And it's just not working. And I don't look like my friend who is doing the same diet as me. And this obsession with like being, I don't know, being goal oriented in that way, I suppose.
Definitely. Yeah. It can be very toxic.
So moving on from that, what is a food rule and how do you break a food rule?
So to me, that's like, if you have some kind of really rigid rule around your eating, Now it's like disclaimer, like I'm vegan, so it's kind of weird, like coming from that. You're like, don't you have so many rules? But it's more about like the way that you eat than what you're eating. So, for example, if you're like, oh, I never eat past 7 o'clock, right? It's like, okay, I don't. So that's already something that's external, kind of taking an influence on your hunger and fullness levels. And that's like not what we want. We want to be able to kind of intuitively listen to the body. So if you have a rule like, oh, I can only have 1 tablespoon of peanut butter, or I can only, eat between this window, right? Like intermittent fasting. We're not even going to go there, but that kind of thing. Or as you were mentioning, like I don't eat white bread or whatever. Now if it's something that you feel strongly about ethically, or you have an actual allergy or something like that, of course that's not what we're talking about. People always ask that. They're like, well, this makes me feel so horrible when I eat it. Like that's an okay food rule to have. Like if you like are vomiting for something, that's fine. You don't have to eat it. But basically what we want to do is like kind of play around with that food rule. So say you can't have ice cream in the house. This is a good example. You can't have ice cream in the house. You're like, I eat the whole pint of ice cream every time. And I can't feel satisfied, right? So we're clearly not really paying attention to what's happening. It's maybe a mindless experience, maybe it's an emotional experience, whatever. But when we set ourselves up to kind of experiment with that, when it's not a good time is like you're super, super hungry and you're like, oh, I'm allowed to have ice cream now in my intuitive eating journey. So like, let me just break out the ice cream and see if I can control myself around it. Okay, you're super hungry. Maybe you had a long day at work. Like that's not the time, right? Like it's not the time to explore your newfound food freedom when you're super stressed and you're not setting yourself up for success. I have so many people say they can't control themselves around food, and it's a lot of the times it ends up being based on so many different factors that aren't willpower at all. So you just want to set yourself up for success in that scenario. The first time is not going to be when you're really stressed out, and just giving yourself kind of time and space to like mess up, especially when you're starting to kind of break through something. It's going to be trial and error. You're going to eat the whole pint of ice cream again, just like you usually did. Like probably a lot more times. So it just takes time, and you kind of have to set up the right environment.
Yeah, I mean, speaking as someone who used to have a lot of food rules, I had so many food rules. I don't eat, I mean, and they for me were disguised as being health conscious, right? I was like, well, I'm really health conscious, so I don't eat sugar. I don't drink
Mm-hmm.
alcohol because, it makes you fat. I always thought alcohol makes
Mm-hmm.
you fat. I'll just be honest with that was my
Yeah.
thinking. I drink now. I mean, anyway, whatever. I had a lot of food rules. I was, I grew up really with a little bit, I would say some disordered eating patterns. And so I can totally relate to like eating the entire tub of ice cream because that was me. Like I didn't eat sugar and I didn't eat dairy. So if I got ice cream in front of me, I would just eat all of it and then I wouldn't
Yeah.
feel very good about it. And then I'd be like, see, I just shouldn't be eating ice cream because now I
Yes.
feel shit. Well, no, it wasn't. I mean, the ice cream made me feel bad because I ate an entire tub of it as opposed to like eating a bowl, which may have made me feel really happy if I had just like let myself enjoy the food. I do remember it being in high school one time, a friend of mine, we were having some ice cream at her house and she said, I think I was complaining about it or something because I was insecure about my weight and insecure about what I was eating, but she was doing it. And I wanted to eat it too. And she said, Danielle, if it doesn't make you like, I don't have any hangups around this because I like ice cream and it makes me feel good. But if this is something that you're going to be, obsessing about, then I don't really want to eat ice cream with you. And that was the first
Mm-hmm.
time that I even kind of like, I was young. I would say 15, but it was like the first time that I ever kind of got like, oh, some people, like not everyone feels this way about ice cream or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that you
Mm-hmm.
brought that up because I have so many. I,
Ice cream. Ice cream is a big one, I feel like, especially because, as you mentioned, like if you restricted yourself for so long with ice cream and then you get around ice cream, like what do we think is going to happen? That's what kind of makes that out of control feeling. And then to the dieter, they're like see, I can't control myself around this, and that's why I can't have it ever. Which in reality, it's due to the restriction that you overdid it on the ice cream. And if it was always available and always around, it kind of loses the power.
Yeah,
But
exactly. And now that I've been in my adult life working more on intuitive eating and breaking patterns of diet culture that were ingrained in me very young, I do notice that I don't even, if I can have ice cream in the house now, and it doesn't, like, I'm not sitting there thinking about it. It's not calling my name from the freezer, and I can eat just enough to make me feel like I don't want to eat anymore, and I can put it away. And to be honest, it's a really like freeing feeling. But I had, like you said, I had to go through a long time of just working on some of my own personal stuff. It was always like my personal stuff coming up, right? So
Mhm.
but yeah, I mean, the best, I guess I would say the best way to break a food rule is to just start breaking them, right?
Yeah, yeah. People
Yeah,
are scared too. So it's hard to kind of like get yourself to take that leap, because you know there are going to be times when you're on that journey that you're going to overeat, and there's going to be times in your whole life where you're going to overeat. That was me last night at dinner. I was like, oh no, that was too much. It
yeah,
happens. It happens.
yeah, and that's okay, right?
Hmm.
Okay, so moving on from that, when you think of eating disorders and disordered eating patterns, is there a difference between that? And the reason I'm asking that question is because I will say, um, I never considered myself to have an eating disorder, but I now can be honest with myself that I had some disordered eating patterns. Like, I wasn't completely starving to myself. I never ended up in the hospital for malnutrition or anything like that. I wasn't like vomiting my food up or anything like that. The stereotypical what you think of an eating disorder. But
Hmm.
I had a lot of food rules and was very restrictive and was very fat phobic. And now that I look back on it, I'm like, yeah, that's all, body dysmorphia and disordered eating patterns for sure. But I could never really be honest with myself about it. So I just think that it's important to talk about what the differences between those are. Is there a difference? Am I just, am I something up here? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so a true eating disorder is really only something that is like diagnosed, right, by your physician or practitioner. I think, you know, it's so hard to say because it's one of those things that is really shameful. So people don't really tend to like seek treatment for it, or, you don't really listen to someone like in the throes of their eating disorder talking so candidly like you were, because it's not even something you're really aware of at the time. And it's so normalized, right? So it's really hard to like, oh, all my friends talk about like how fat they are and how much they hate themselves and how we can't eat this and we should be eating more of this. So it can be really hard even on an individual level to parse through like, is this an eating disorder, am I just having kind of weird tendencies? And I think those kind of disorder patterns for some do turn into a really restrictive situation where they have to go inpatient, or they're in like really intense therapies and stuff for malnutrition, as you mentioned. But there's also something called orthorexia, where you're really obsessive over your food choices. And I think that's something that only recently has been given a name, because I think with the rise of wellness as kind of a buzzword rather than what it really is, I think that a lot of people get really obsessive. And so that's orthorexia is kind of like more focused on those food rules and how, you might not be like in a hospital bed, like with an IV feeling really horrible, but it might be like truly a mental burden. And I think that a lot of times people look for treatment or something when it's disrupting your life in a way that's not acceptable to you anymore. So I think you can definitely have a disordered eating pattern, and then you kind of get that moment where you're like, wait, maybe that's not right. And then you can shift away from it. For some, that happens. And then for some people, it just kind of continues to snowball. And then you're in trouble with something that is more diagnosable and causing you more problems.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't have much to add to that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, is a disordered, oh, I already asked you that. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like it's sort of like that question is actually kind of interesting because when we talk about like how would you describe disordered eating, um, it looks different on so many people, but I think the biggest thing is that there's certain things like when I was thinking about this earlier, I was thinking about Whole 30 or certain cleanses. Okay, some people can go on that and they're like, okay, it's fine for me. I don't have this weird like compulsion with it. I don't have a history. I'm cool. I learned how to cook more and whatever. That's great, right? But some people do that, and that's like the gateway drug to dieting and eating disorder and all that. So you're really kind of like rolling the dice, and these industries are kind of doing that too. Some people are like, oh, I'm feeling so great and this is awesome. And then for other people, it's what catapulted them into disordered eating.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember looking at a lot of these diet books, and I would read every single one that came out. And I always said that was because I had an interest in nutrition. And actually, when
Mm.
I was in undergrad, I took a few nutrition classes thinking maybe I would be a dietitian. And I remember the teacher, like, I remember dropping the class because the teacher said, everything is in moderation is okay, even McDonald's. And I was like, that is not true. And I am not into this type of, if that's what they're telling people, then I'm not into it. I'm more of like, I'm more holistic or whatever. Um, but yeah, so I would read all of these books that came around, and I do remember thinking some of them were maybe a little too intense. I mean, like the body ecology diet is like such an intense diet, and I knew people that did it. And I remember thinking, okay, that's maybe I don't want to eat fermented foods like breakfast, lunch, and dinner all of the time, and like drink broth, and I want to eat some actual, I don't know, I want to eat salads or whatever. But I would also kind of look at some of them and feel vindicated almost because they were parroting some of the things that I had picked up along the way. And I don't even know where I picked up some of these ideas. I just did. And, for example, like maybe I had this idea that, I didn't want to eat anything too fattening. So I wasn't eating any dairy and I wasn't eating any red meat and any of this. And then I read E-Ryt for your blood type. And, my blood type is A. And so it was telling me that I should have more of a Mediterranean diet, which is kind of how I already was eating without any of the pasta. And
Mhm.
I felt like really vindicated because I was like, oh, see, this is science. Science is on my side. And it's okay that I eat like this or whatever. Um, so I guess, yeah, that's kind of how those diet books always came up for me. I would like leave whatever I didn't really agree with, and then whatever I agreed with, I would like cling on to it as like being, scientific and me being like the healthiest version of myself or whatever. And there are two times in my life when I ever really thought that maybe I had a bad relationship with food or whatever. One of them was when I was an exchange student when I was in high school, and I went to Germany as an exchange student, and they have a very healthy relationship with food. At least the people that I was around did.
Mhm.
They really just eat whatever they want. And all of the kids in my high school, like I wasn't having the conversations with kids in my high school in Germany that I was having with kids at my high school in Hawaii. Like nobody was talking about if their clothes fit them, what size they were, how much they weighed. And they all seemed like to exude this confidence. And my grandmother, my host grandmother in Germany, she had been a child during the war. And at the end of the war in Germany, people were starving to death because all of the food that Germany was making was going to the war effort. And she said to me, I was complaining because I had gained weight because I went from Hawaii and suddenly I was on this dairy farm eating like raw milk and in Germany with like a heavier diet, colder temperatures outside. And she said to me, Danielle, why are you so obsessed with being thin? Thin people die. And that's just something because she was seeing people, as a kid, they didn't have enough food and she was seeing people die of starvation, it's really
Mhm.
bad.
Mhm.
Um, and that kind of stuck with, I always think that now, whenever I'm like finding myself kind of like cycling into maybe an old pattern where I'm like, no, I just really can't eat bread. I think about that. Like, why am I so obsessed, or why was I so obsessed with this idea of thinness and being thin? Like, who even taught me that anyway? And
Mhm.
also, like, I heard somebody on a podcast say the other day, like, you don't owe the world a thin body. Like, you don't owe it to anybody. You owe it to yourself to just be as happy as you can be, and
Mhm.
and not be caught up or like stuck in these like mental traps. So anyway, that's
Right.
a tangent on.
No, it makes sense. And I think a lot of the times we attach like some sort of morality to weight too. Like, oh, if you're fat, you just don't care about yourself. Or, oh, if that person's thin, they must, really take care of their body and value and take like more of an active role in their health when the complete opposite could be true. It really doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, exactly. So what are some of the tools that you give your clients to kind of to combat diet culture?
All right. This is like my favorite question. So, number one is definitely your sphere of influence. So figuring out like where you're getting information from and where maybe you shouldn't be getting the information from. Like, I have had people who, um, follow certain people or subscribe to certain like email threads about really like fear mongery, like diet culture stuff. So a lot of times it can just be like unsubscribing from emails or unfollowing that person, or just kind of noticing where you're getting that. You mentioned so many times, I have no idea where I even got that from. So at least the things that are going to be a negative source, just get rid of them. And then less body checking. Like if you walk past a mirrored surface or like a window or something, everybody's like checking themselves out in the mirror. Like, how do I look today? So it's like basically every opportunity that you do that is kind of an opportunity to feel negatively. And sometimes maybe you see yourself and you're like, wow, I look really great. But just kind of like less emphasis on the body, especially if you're currently struggling with having overemphasis on the body. Um, and then that kind of goes into body neutrality, which we talked a little bit about last time about, not feeling like you have to have this huge love for your body right away, especially if you're like starting from ground zero. So just kind of allowing yourself to maybe just focus on things that your body can do, some positive aspects, but without being like, I love every like curve that's on me, that might not come right away. So just being kind of reasonable with yourself and taking it slowly if you need to. And then I think for a lot of people, movement does come into play. I really, especially when I'm with clients, don't really ever say the word exercise or anything just because it has such a negative connotation with for so many people. I mean, it starts like in high school when you're like in gym, like running the mile. I mean, it's so like everybody hates it. Oh, it's so annoying, whatever. So we want to reclaim some kind of joyful movement in a way that you can feel good about your body, and whatever way that works for you.
Yeah. I have to say that I stopped following people that I made a rule for myself, that I would stop following in these influencers if they were promoting weight loss products. So I just decided, I don't want to see flat tummy tea anymore, because
Oh
I
yeah,
see it
no.
enough times, like I start thinking, maybe I am bloated. Like I don't,
Hmm.
but I would have never thought of that before I saw this influencer talking about it so many times. So if any influencer, that I like, even ones that I like, and sometimes I've had to sit there and be like, no, Danielle, you made this rule for yourself. You can't follow this person whether you like them or not. There was one influencer that I like private messaged, and I was like, hey, you can do better than this. You don't need to be like promoting flat tummy tea.
Mhm.
Obviously, like the influencer like never probably even saw my message. But after I like that, I really didn't want to stop following them because I don't know, I liked them for whatever reason. But they kept doing it, so I just stopped following them. And I cannot tell you how much of a difference that has made for me, because if I see a picture of somebody who's promoting whatever, I don't know, looking a certain way or whatever, and it makes me feel bad about myself, I've just decided that I just don't need that in my life, and so I've stopped following them. And that doesn't mean that I don't follow fitness people. I follow a lot of fitness people, and the thing is that you don't have to be subscribing to like to diet culture to be a fitness person. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, no,
There are
absolutely.
some that definitely do. And so those are the ones that I'm like, okay, this person makes me feel, like bread is the worst thing on the whole planet. So I'm just gonna stop following them because I like to eat bread sometimes, you know?
Right. Totally,
Yeah.
totally. It can be like, even we have like that's the one thing we do have control over, even if it seems kind of like, I think a lot of people feel kind of out of control with the social media stuff, but like you really can like delete that person. You really can unfollow that person, like full permission.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
And then I
Mhm.
started following a lot of people too, that are very body positive. And
Mhm.
I have some questions sometimes about that too. I mean, sometimes I think even the body positive people put so much emphasis on their body that I'm like, or they make
Right.
recovery from eating disorders seem like a little easier than maybe it is. Um, and the reason I say that is, obviously you only get a glimpse of somebody on social media. You don't know what's in their mind. And, maybe they are basically faking it until they make it. But, in my experience, I definitely don't practice at, disordered eating patterns anymore. But like, that doesn't mean that sometimes those ideas don't still like flitter through my head and
Mhm.
I have to ground down back into who I am and what I believe in. And, and kind of tell myself like, no, like I guess practicing body neutrality is like what I have to do.
Yeah.
Like like you said the other day, your body is not the most interesting thing about you. There are so many other things about me that are so much more interesting than the way that I look or whatever. So
Mhm.
um
Absolutely.
yeah, it's not always just like, okay, I've decided to love myself today. So now I'm
Yeah.
now I'm body positive and that's just how it is.
Right.
Sometimes I think some of those influencers make that look a little too easy too. But anyway,
Yeah.
the point being like, yeah, just stop following people that make you feel bad. Start following some people that are kind of living, I guess, the way that you want to see yourself. And then find somebody like yourself, like Emily, to help you out with that if you need it. Um, what do you so just we're going to wrap this up, but do you have any free suggestions for people? Like, are there Facebook groups that they could join, or if they're thinking, the holidays are really triggering for me, I'd like to maybe talk to somebody about, you know about body positivity or about, breaking some bad eating patterns or whatever, but maybe I don't have a lot of money right now. What kind of resources do you think are out there for people?
Yeah, so I would really suggest just especially because it's like so saturated with information that, as we mentioned, can be kind of diet culture in like a costume of intuitive eating or wellness. So I really, Evelyn Tribole is her name, Tribole. And she has a book called Intuitive Eating, and that's kind of like the one stop kind of lets you know everything about it. And then also the book Health at Every Size by Lindo Bacon. That one has a lot of really good science rooted information about weight. And I've had a lot of people who have really changed their kind of thought process around it after reading those kinds of books. So I think books are a really good one. You could do audio books, anything like that. There's a lot of podcasts and stuff too with dietitians. I think one it's called Food Freedom. So if you kind of look for different resources, I think books and podcasts by dietitians are probably good ones.
Nice.
Yeah.
And would you recommend that anyone follow any particular influencers, just since, we're doing this kind of as an Instagram chat,
Mm.
and Instagram is, I mean, it's just so big these days. Is there
Yeah.
anyone you would really recommend people follow?
Yeah. So if maybe we can like put it in the comments on our thing, like I'll tag a bunch of them below. So then people can just click on them and then I can like compile a good list.
Okay, that sounds
Yeah.
perfect. All
Cool.
right. Awesome. Well, I think next week what we're going to talk about is more of the positive side. So body neutrality, body positivity. What do those mean? Um, that sort of thing. But thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Talk to you next week.